Hey, this is Natalie Callback. I'm the author of Artful Adventures in Mixed Media, and today I have here Jimmy Leslie, who is an artist, and he participated and contributed artwork and some very smart things to my book. So I thought I'm gonna have Jimmy and have a little interview and see that you get to know him a little bit better, and maybe there's some interesting things we're gonna talk about. Hey, Jimmy.
Hey, how you doing? I hope I say smart things now that you said I contributed smart things.
I'm sure you will. So I know Jimmy for quite a while now. I think we met a couple years ago at Paper World in Frankfurt, where he was
Yeah.
working for Call Art. He's a Liquitex artist, but he will tell you a little bit more about himself in a minute. But that's where I met him personally, and then it turned out I moved to New Jersey and he lives in New Jersey, and then we worked together a little bit. And so it's just pretty amazing. He's a really cool guy, awesome artist, and a very good mentor, so
Oh,
to
that's nice.
say. So, Jimmy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I would consider myself, I suppose, an artist educator. So I spent about 15 years following graduate school teaching on the college level. I was fortunate. I started teaching at St. John's University in Queens, New York, and they were awesome because they let me do anything really. They said, "Hey Jimmy, can you teach photography?" Sure, I can do that. And I went, oh no, I better learn photography. But I did. I got to teach photography, painting, drawing, art history, jewelry making. I don't know if I ever. Yeah, I don't know if I ever told you that. Yeah.
Really?
Well, yeah. They were, they didn't have a jewelry shop where they could do welding or anything like that. So it was all bending wires and twisting and
Cool.
doing all sorts of, yeah, kind of, I guess, different things than you would expect in a jewelry making shop. So I got to sort of develop the course with a professor. So
Cool.
while I wouldn't call myself a jeweler, I did get to do that for a while. And then, of course, I got to teach painting and drawing, which is what I love. I'm a painter. And I did that for about 15 years, not just there, but some other schools as well. And it's been 9 years now. I
Hmm.
left teaching, and now I work as the resident artist for a company called Colart, and they own Winsor& Newton and Liquitex artist materials. And it's funny because when you hear resident artist, people think, well, that's usually you go on a residency, you work for a while someplace. I'm like, no, it's actually a full-time job. And I run their education program, and I get to test new art materials and all sorts of great stuff like that. So I still consider myself an artist educator because I run this education program, and that's dear to me, connecting with people like you do.
So yeah, actually, you were responsible for me when I was a brand ambassador for Liquitex,
Yeah.
and I learned heaps of stuff from you about acrylic
Uh,
paint, which is like pretty crazy. And I often think about you when I try new stuff, and I'm like, what would Jimmy say? How to, like,
that's a great deal of pressure from me. What would Jimmy say?
no, in
No,
a good way, in a good
oh, yeah,
way.
I'd say give it a shot. I mean, you're a good student. I think you're too kind about that. But I mean, it's fun working with people who are fun to work around.
Right,
So I think that's why you and I had a lot of good time
right.
doing that, and get to do this now, and enjoy this process. And yeah, it's just a fun collaboration for
Do
me.
you miss teaching at a college or?
Yeah, I do. I do a bit. Because it's that contact with the student. First of all, they keep you young, which is good. The older you get, that's good. I don't know if I know like all the cool terms kids are saying now, but I was on top of that at one time. But yeah, because I tell you what, the thing I loved the most about teaching was really the mentor aspect of it.
Mhm.
I enjoyed when a student would have a class of mine, take a class of mine, and then they needed an independent study credit. So they needed to go further, and that's something where I would work with them one on one a few times a week. We'd meet and we'd develop the projects ourselves. And I really loved that because I feel like I had some good mentors, but I always tell art students that it's a very small world.
Mm,
I mean, take just what you said. You and I met in Germany. Okay, that's just so weird. I mean, I obviously you're from there, but you I remember you came up to me like, "Hey, I've seen you online," and I'm like, "Oh, that's weird." Okay, and you were referring to some of the product videos I did for the company, and then I remember that day vividly. You said, "Oh yeah, I'm moving to the United States." I'm like, "Oh really? Where?" They're like, "Well, New Jersey." I'm like, "Okay, our office is in New Jersey, and I live in New Jersey." And then you tell me where, and I'm like, "Okay, that's so close by." So and I think the idea of being a mentor to me is helping people with advice to make their path a little bit easier than yours was.
hmm
Because I think people appreciate that a lot. When you can give somebody a helping hand, and I joke about it, but it's true. I've said to students in the past, hey, I don't know that ten years down the road, you might be able to do something great for me in
Right.
return. And I'm not looking for that. It's not it's a purely altruistic endeavor, I think, mentoring somebody. But I have had really nice things happen. I just had a student of mine reach out to me 2 weeks ago, and
hmm
he's self-publishing his illustrations in a book and asked me to write the foreword. So, just I
Yeah.
love that that comes back around.
That's pretty cool. I think it's also because I think there's something about this art tribe in a way. I mean, I don't know 100% because I haven't studied art, so I'm not like, engraved in that culture because I'm kind of like, did like a weird path into it. But I've always feel there's something generous in like in most circles that I have encountered with professional artists, with hobby artists. There's something about this like sharing and like collaborating and like just embracing that we are doing that we have something in common and we might be
Yeah.
like very different in many other perspectives of life, but what we have in common is we love to do something creative and share it with other people. And I really think that's like the coolest thing about other people that are artists. So
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you hit on something. It's a sharing, but what we all share as well is the struggle.
mhm,
And I don't mean the struggle in a teen movie sort of angst way. I'm a tortured artist, and it's not that. It's just that we know even in the best of circumstances. You and I could sit and we could get into philosophy and say, the world needs art.
mhm,
Okay, fair enough. But the world doesn't really need art when you're somebody who's struggling to put food in your mouth and a roof over your head. It's not a necessity. So, the things that you and I produce or the things that other artists produce are not that, you need a car to get around or some sort of transportation. You need the clothing you have, your eyeglasses, you need
right.
so I think we all deal with that struggle. And I think we all the one thing that always comes up in my mind too is how I think people don't realize that what we do is work.
Mhm,
Because we enjoy it, especially when I was teaching. I
mhm,
work as an artist in a corporate world right now, which is a very sort of odd thing.
mhm.
When I was a teacher, sometimes people, friends would say, "Oh, are you working today?" I'd say, "Oh, yeah, I am." And they say, "Oh, what classes are you teaching?" I said, "Well, no, I'm in my studio today." And they say, "Oh, I thought you said you were working." Well, I am, but because it wasn't punching a time clock and
Mm.
working 9 to 5, which is the normal conception of work, and that's I think that kind of can weigh heavily on you. It's sort of like you're not doing anything all that serious. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I think it's also, and I think that's something that a lot of times I hear, not a lot of times, but sometimes people that are not artists, when they hear what you do and they really like it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. I wish I could have time for that. And
Mm,
I'm like, well, it's not that, I have to make time for that because it's my work. It's like
absolutely.
you make time for your work too. It's the same thing. And I actually, when I stopped being a paralegal, I really had a hard time in the beginning, like I
Mm.
was like, okay, no, I'm a full-time artist. And then
That's a
I was
scary
like,
proposition.
yeah, and how
Yeah.
does that work? And the first couple of weeks, I really had a hard time, probably months, actually, I'm lying, to like, I was like waiting that like genius things happen,
Yeah, that big strike of inspiration. Yeah.
Exactly. And that doesn't happen. So I'm actually, I have to get up early in the morning
Yeah.
and I have to limit my time online and I have to make sure that I have certain times where I'm undisturbed in my studio. Speaking of which, though, so
Mm.
now you're making art at work, right? Or
Yeah.
like all kinds of stuff at work. But then you also do your personal, I call it personal artwork.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you make sure that, first of all, it's personal, like that you do really something that has not always this thing like, oh, I could use that at work too. And how do you
Sure.
make time for making art at all?
Yeah, I mean, you say it in a very in the proper way that you have to make time,
Hmm.
and that was always the thing. Just kind of going back to mentoring for a minute. When I was working with college students, that was a big thing in helping them understand that nobody's going to care if you don't do it.
Hmm.
They won't. Nobody's gonna come and knock on your door and say, Natalie, you're not making work today. You need to, it's not like a quote unquote normal job. For me, one of the things that I was always is so important to me when I was teaching and in my own practice is a sketchbook.
Hmm.
Uh, I've it's right here. It is. It's
Yay!
right here. It's right, and I just bought a new one today because I'm almost done with that, and that is so important to me. I start every day,
Hmm.
almost. I never like to talk in absolutes, but I start almost every day by working in my sketchbook, and to me, there's a cumulative effect of that. It's sort of like exercise. If I want to
Hmm.
stay active, I need to do something every day,
Hmm.
and that will build up, and that will have a benefit over time. And a sketchbook for me means that even on the busiest days, I will find time to work. Now, granted, that's not working on a completed and finished painting that we would
Hmm.
normally think of. I see the painting on the easel behind you that you're working on. But it's those little moments that really fuel me. I have stopped by the doctor's office this afternoon, have a checkup. My sketchbook will be there.
Hmm.
I'm not gonna. Um, and no judgment against anybody who does, but I'm not going to flip through People magazine to see what Jennifer Aniston's doing.
You don't?
No, I hope she's doing great, but she doesn't call me anymore. So I'm sorry, I can't invest time in her. But I'll sit there with my sketchbook and observe everything around me.
Hmm.
And then I have to say though, to answer your question in a more direct way, I have a wife who supports me, who always is and is an artist herself, and is creative and knows that I'm probably the best me that I can be, not without sounding too, I don't know, too silly about that and too new agey. But I'm the best me when I'm working, and also my two kids have grown up around me, working and playing in my studio, so they allow me that time. I still have to make that time, and
Hmm.
I, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was the artist Chuck Close, and I think he said something to the effect of inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just get to work. And I think it's sometimes just going in the studio and cleaning up.
Hmm.
For me, I'm a little bit of a neat freak, so it's just like let me arrange and place, and it's a sort of a ritual that
Hmm.
helps me get into the act. And then before I know it, you start working, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I've been out here 2 hours, 3 hours. So it's yeah, it's not easy. I wish there was a way I could tell people, well, just do this and this, and it's all easy. It's not. It's not. But the reward is, I think, big.
Right. I think that is so important that, like in my book is a little bit more about like how you go on an artful adventure and like the whole thing about like where do good ideas come from? They come from
Mhm.
other ideas. Like how do I see the world around me and collect bits and pieces like you do probably in your sketchbook, right? But then it's a little bit more practical and like, okay, now you have to get to work. Like how do I take whatever I've seen and that inspired me and put that into my work. Like I see, for example, some really cool pattern on a door, and then I'm thinking, this might be a really cool stencil.
Yeah.
So I'm turning that into a stencil and and then implement that into my artwork. So how do you go on artful adventures and like collect, besides maybe your sketchbook, but what are your artful adventures to collect ideas and inspiration that you might
Yeah.
come back later to?
Sure. For me, I love travel.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, in my job working for an art materials company, I get to travel with that, and even next week I'll be in Utah, and I'm gonna take a little time to see Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty.
Nice.
And I'm gonna take photos. I will draw in my sketchbook, but what I love about travel, whether it's for work and I'll take little moments there, or whether it's with my family. I like seeing new anything new excites
Mm-hmm.
me. I love the history of old things, and that you I feel like you always have a lot of history in your work. It's layers, and
Mm-hmm.
it has that sort of feeling that something's been around, something's been happening, and there's a story going on, and I
Mm-hmm.
really like that. But I like that happening out of new experiences, and
Mm-hmm.
it's funny when I talk about travels. Those travels could be a mile down the road from my house. They could be halfway across the world. And they could even be things like I've been inspired before by, I remember one time a few years back, my wife bought a new comforter for the
Mm-hmm.
bed. And it had all these patterns. And I said, oh, I walked in, I was like, I have to paint that. I have to and that set me off on a journey at that time. It was a number of years ago of dealing with a lot of patterns for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, and I find that intriguing. It was so weird. I saw that day, and all of a sudden, it was like I saw a pattern everywhere.
Yeah.
So for me, part of it is being very aware.
Mm-hmm.
Being very cognizant of what's going on around you. And you made a good point before. You said that to work, you have to limit your time online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are a tremendous amount of distractions for us these days. Technology is great. It affords us what we're doing right now,
Mm-hmm.
talking to each other, 40 miles apart from one another.
Right.
But it is a major, major distraction as well. So I think it's about sort of shutting some of those things out and being very cognizant of where I am. And I think when I'm at my most aware, I'm able to see things
Mm-hmm.
that I might not otherwise see. I think a lot of people, they go through the world with their head down in their phone like this, and they're not seeing those things that maybe you and I are seeing
Right.
because we are more aware. So, if you're talking about having an artful adventure, I think it can happen anywhere.
Right.
I took a bike ride this morning and was in a park, and I'm just so aware of the fact that I want to be out here. The weather's turned. It's starting to. It's February, but right now we're having a gorgeous spring day, and I want to be outside painting. So it can happen in so many ways. But I also write in my sketchbook a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I will write ideas down and come back to them later.
So, yeah, I totally second what you're saying, like that you have to be open. For example, my husband loves jazz music. It's not that I don't like jazz music, but it's like the crazy jazz music sometimes, where you're like, is there a melody? What's going on?
Yeah.
I don't understand. This is too abstract for me.
Okay.
So, but basically, whatever people might say about modern art or expressionism or whatever, and they're like, I don't get it. That's what I'm with jazz music sometimes, right? But he watched this. He wanted to watch this documentary on jazz, and it was like a Ken Burns documentary. And I was like, shoot me now! It's 12 hours of like jazz. And then I was like, I will be relaxing, and I will just like watch it with you. And absolutely loved it, and I got so much inspiration out of it because I kind of like saw there's like something that is, like painting and people like how do instruments work together, and I'm like that's like art materials working together, and I was just like it sparked so many things for me, and that's just an example how sometimes if you're just open to the weirdest stuff and you
Sure.
just like get over and say, I'm gonna say yes to this weird, you know, jazz documentary.
I love that. Well, I mean, you're lucky too. It was Ken Burns. He's like the father of modern documentary. I think he's the guy who took it into the future. I think he
Right.
can paint drying, be very interesting. But you said the word weird there, and I love that because my daughter's 11, and
Hmm.
we have this thing. I will tell her she's the weirdest person I've ever met, and she will in turn tell me, well, you know what? You're the weirdest dad that there ever was. And then we thank each other. We're like, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And it's that idea of, what is weird anyway, and what is normal
Right.
anyway. I don't know. That's something we can debate again. But I think when we're talking about it in a fun way, what we're really talking about is the ability to see and do outside the norm. Because let's face it, making art, it's not the norm for most adults. It is
Hmm.
for kids. I mean, that's the beauty of it. Is like, with everything you do, with your workshops, with your book, you're teaching people to be creative. You have this idea that I feel very strongly about, is that everybody can be more creative than they are.
Hmm.
It's not, I've always said to students, you want your doctor to be creative. Because if they're performing surgery and they run into a problem, you don't want them to throw their hands up and say, well, that's it. I don't know what to do. I guess this is over. You want
Right.
to find a creative, it's problem solving.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And I think that oftentimes we take little kids who are everybody draws, right? Every little
Hmm.
kid on the sand, they make marks, but we often teach the creativity out of them. And I think with adults, it's about showing them how they can regain that creativity that they had as a kid. And maybe I think the big problem is, as adults, we rationalize too much, and we judge ourselves too
Hmm.
much. Mine isn't as good as yours, so that inhibits the creativity. And that's why I like what you're doing with Artful Adventures. You're bringing the play back into it, and
Hmm.
realizing that work can be playful as well, and
Right.
can be artful as well, and then bring that into the rest of your life, and you got some good stuff happening then.
Yeah, I mean, I always say to my students, when they are like, this didn't turn out the way how I wanted it, or it didn't turn out the way how you showed us, or something. And I think it's so important to let go of perfection, because if that's your hobby, right? I mean, like if you're not like making a living out of art, and this is your hobby, why would you constrain yourself so much and put so much pressure onto yourself
Oh yeah.
thinking you need to be perfect, right? You have to be perfect as in your work, maybe whatever you do, you have to be perfect as a mom, you have to be perfect here. So why would you do this for something that you just do as your hobby, and just like let go and have fun with it, and the rest will come by itself. I always like the things that turned out the most ugly in the beginning, and where I was like, whatever I'm gonna do on it, I can't ruin it anymore anyway.
Yeah.
Those are oftentimes the most liked pieces that I like the most. I don't care if anyone else does, but because I was so free, and because I was like, who gives anything about it,
Well, that's liberating.
yeah.
When you get to that point where you say, what, it can't get any worse anyway. Well,
Right.
then scrape the whole thing down, or
Right.
add to what. If you can't make it any worse, then you can only make it better.
Exactly.
Really. And you're right about that, because a lot of times though, I've been sitting in my studio, and I'll do that a lot too. I'll just sit there sometimes if I'm not ready to make a mark, or if I'm at a block, and I'll just sort of look around the studio. And I have seen older pieces of work, maybe 10 years ago, and all of a sudden I look, and I remember that I was doing a certain thing. I was talking about patterns before. It's
Hmm.
like maybe I was making a certain pattern, and then I only did that for 10, 15 paintings maybe, or whatever it was, a short period of time, and It didn't work for me then. But I look at my work now and I'm like, wow, there's some of that made its way back into there. And I just wasn't ready at the time, or I wasn't receptive. And, or, you know, a lot of the things the piece of advice I'd give to anybody watching this and anybody reading your book as well is that those failures, hold on to them for a little while. You'll learn from them. Don't, because when you think it's a failure, you're probably at your most down on yourself in the work, and you're not thinking clearly. Then, you know, you're not. It's not. You know, none of us think clearly when we're that upset about something. So it's like, leave that thing. Come back with fresh eyes, a day, a week, maybe a month, 2 months later, and see. And worst come to worst, if it still doesn't work on its own as its own art piece, tear it up and attach it to something else. Maybe it has a new life.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I also want to talk to you. So, what are you drawing mostly inspiration from? Like, are you mostly interested? You said so many different things. Like, you're sketching when you're going to the doctor, and I saw actually everyone. I'm going to put that later into the video. Jimmy posts all his sketches on his Instagram feed, which is really cool. I look forward to it every morning. So, what's like your main everything? Are you drawing everything?
Yeah, well, I don't know, to a degree. You know, the sketchbook things, sketchbooks are very personal to a lot of people. And not that they're not personal to me, it's just that I don't mind sharing it. I don't know, it's not so personal. You know, what I don't do is there are pages that, you know, I write things on, and that may be as mundane as my shopping list, which sometimes I'll illustrate, or I'll even illustrate my packing list. You'll see little underwear and socks. I'll draw, you know, silly things. Well, I have posted some of those, but you know, what you don't see sometimes is the personal things where I'm having a lousy day and I use it as a diary. Not the sort of diary where I write, oh, Nathalie's dreamy, ooh, and I write, but the sort of thing where I say like, this is the worst day, I hate this, and I will write things down that help me maybe get over a block. But if you were to look at the Instagram feed, you would see these sort of daily things. And what I've found over time is I'm not judgmental about what I'm doing in my sketchbook on a daily basis. And you brought that up. And because I'm not, it frees me up to try new things there, because it doesn't feel, you know, when it's this size, this little sketchbook, it doesn't feel monumental like a 5-foot canvas. You know, so those things may not necessarily turn into bigger works of art, but they'll inform certain things I do. But I have to say that the landscape is important to me, and it's I had a very academic background. I attended the graduate school of figurative art at the New York Academy of Art a long time ago, and it was that very academic training, which was good, but it academic training doesn't always allow you to be as creative as you can be. It's very structured. And I've spent a lot of time moving away from that. So really my goal in my work oftentimes, although I would consider it representational work, is to have abstract passages to it. And I just love seeing blocks of color in landscapes. I find myself drawn to the people who can simplify forms the most, because I think it's easy, not necessarily easy to draw something in the most technical way, but it's easy to overwork and try to over-render and overachieve those things. But it takes a great deal of skill to put down a block of color in the right placement to something else and then leave it alone. So I feel like I see those things in the landscape. You know, and the other thing, a lot of stuff too, is some of the travel I do is each summer, my brother and I, for I think it's 17 years now, we go on a motorcycle trip, just the two of us. We pick a direction. We pack really light. It's like one pair of jeans, 2 pair of underwear, no, each. We don't share, but you know, we travel, and it is the most it's the lightest way to travel, and you are I don't know if this sounds goofy, but not being in a car, you're aware of everything. You're just so aware of everything. And he's a photographer, So we take these breaks to find things that are interesting, and I find that they inform me throughout the year. So a lot of times you'll see work that not only has landscapes, but maybe has motorcycles in it, or
Hmm.
I like vehicles a lot because I think I like to travel by road, more so than flying. When you travel by road, you stop somewhere and you meet somebody
Hmm.
at a gas station, at a diner, and you get to know people a little bit more. So yeah, anything with travel just gets me super excited. If you told me you were traveling somewhere tomorrow, I would get so excited to go. I want to go with you. I just yeah. My wife's that way too. It's yeah.
I
We
think
have fun.
traveling is amazing, and I love road trips too, like a lot. Actually, you sent me one of the you. I had several of your artworks. Unfortunately, that's a little bit of a background information. My book was supposed to be longer, and then at the end, sometimes this happens. The publisher decided it's going to be shorter because
Yeah,
whatever. That's what they decided for all
cutting room
books.
floor.
And they were like, you have to cut things out. And I was like, oh, no. So there's two pieces of artwork that I'm going to put in the video that didn't make it into the book. And one of them is actually where coming from one of those trips with your brother, let me look what it was called. I'm not very well. Um, American Road Trip.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was boy, if I remember correct, I don't remember the year. I want to say
2010.
2007 or 8
10.
or well, yeah, okay, 2010.
Oh,
Yeah,
maybe you didn't. Well, it says American Road Trip, Jimmy Leslie, 2010. Maybe you made it in
oh,
2010.
I don't even know. Who know? I don't. You know what?
Whatever.
I don't even. He's really good at knowing where we went, what year. It all blends together for me. But yeah, we were going through West Virginia, through coal mine territory in the mountains, and we met a man. And this is why I love to travel by road. We were going down the road through a mountain, and there was water coming down from a stream right off the mountain. And this man was filling milk jugs with water, 20, 30 of them, and putting them in the back of a truck. And we stopped, and we had canteens, like camping canteens.
Hmm.
And he said, "Oh, would you like to get some water?" And just pure water. So we did, and we said, "Well, what are you doing with all the water?" And he said, "Oh, it's for my mother. She doesn't have running water." And yeah,
Wow.
he said, how could this be in a country like America that she doesn't have running water? And and he said to us when he saw our license plates, he said, "Oh, you're from New Jersey." I said, "Yeah." And he says, I've never been there." I said, "Oh, okay. Oh, that's not necessarily odd." And he says, "But I've never been out of here." And I said, "Never out of the state?" And he said, "No, never out of the mountains." So within
Wow.
the mountain range that he lived in, and this was a man who was in his early 50s, he had never been outside of there. And to me, yeah, it was American Road Trip. It was the sort of that odd dichotomy, I guess, of how could I be traveling through America and yet somebody is living on an economic level so different than me. And by no means am I a wealthy man, but like most of us, I have running water, and it was very strange to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
very strange.
That's an interesting story. And speaking of story, I noticed, I don't know if that's true for all of your artwork, but especially the ones that you sent me for the book, especially your collages, I always feel that you're telling a story. There's a story, like I mean, it's up to, I guess, sometimes you get like little hints. So one of the ones that you sent me, which is in the book, which is awesome, is called Lloyd Lives On.
Yeah,
So, and it's amazing. Do you want to tell a little bit about
yeah,
the story?
yeah. I guess the first question would be, who's Lloyd?
Yeah, exactly.
um, Lloyd is the previous owner of my house, and I never met him. I never met his wife either. He had passed away. I've been in this house for 15 years, my family and I. And he died maybe a few years before that. And when his wife passed away, his kids sold the house. I say kids; they were in their 50s at the time, but they sold it, and his name was Lloyd. And what I noticed when we moved in the house is Lloyd had notes that he put everywhere. Lloyd was meticulous. So some of the things that you see in that collage that other people will see in your book are like I would find behind the furnace, the manual for the furnace, and he would write that the filter was changed on May 4th at 8:30 a.m. in 1981, and you need to change this again 2 months from now and use product number one. And
Oh.
all that is very useful. It's very helpful for a lot of us who don't do things and say, "Oh, when did I change that thing?" and it need to be repaired because I didn't maintain it. Lloyd, having never met him, I could still tell because he would write down on the basement walls too, everywhere. We would just find his meticulous notes, and I felt like I started to get to know Lloyd through that, and I felt like too, it was a way to pay homage to him. He was a steward of the house. He took care of it. He took care of it. I have it now. It's as they say in real estate, it's got good bones. And yeah, I don't know. It was just a way for me. And also, too, my studio is it's an old two-car garage behind the house. And Lloyd owned a auto parts store. So he was sort of this man's man. That my studio was filled with auto parts, race car tires, camping equipment, woodworking equipment, fishing, hunting, you name it, all that. So I tried to incorporate into that piece these little bits of things that I thought were indicative of Lloyd's hobbies, his life, and all those things. So Lloyd lives on.
I totally love it, and
Yeah.
it's amazing because the collage itself is amazing to look at, and you're kind of like getting a sense of what is this about, and you make up your own story. But then when you hear your story, of course, it's like
Yeah.
it's getting even more. You're like going deeper in it, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, there's a piece of flannel shirt,
Right,
and
right. And the thing is about that, Natalie, Lloyd may have never worn flannel in his life.
right,
But I assume, though, he was a guy who liked to camp and hunt, and so he probably wore flannel. So, I took these liberties and I put those things in there that I felt, and in the end, it's just sort of not even just about Lloyd, but it made me kind of think of my grandfather. I've made collages based on him as well, and he's been passed away now 18 years or so. But I probably would still say I think of him on a weekly, if not sometimes on a daily basis. And so it's taking these little mementos, there are these little moments or these things that remind you of a person, and through art they have this life that goes way beyond that. And of course, whoever views it, they'll make up their own story as well, and that's part of the beauty of art.
Yeah, I love that. It's really cool. It's an amazing piece, and I love this. The storytelling. I think.
Yeah,
I
thank
mean, not everyone tells a story with their artwork, and I'm talking a little bit, not much, but a little bit in the book too. What are like different ways, for that? But I love to tell a story too, and sometimes it's just like more hidden. Mine are all like weird personal stories, or often personal stories in my art journal at least, but they're not very open. Like it's
Yeah,
not like everyone can make their own thing, but it's that my art journal is my sketchbook basically.
sure, sure.
So you do in your sketchbook, I do in my art journal, and then I hide my own thing. I don't write anything, right? I use
Right.
quotes, and then that's hidden. So, but I like the storytelling part of art a lot. So
Mm.
that's cool.
And that's something that really happens in the mixed media collage work that I do more so.
mm,
When I'm painting, I feel like I'm interested in, let's say I'm interested in the landscape as a
mm,
subject. It's about color, it's about form, it's about value, all those sort of fundamentals of
mm-hmm,
art. And just trying to be a good painter,
uh-huh,
because subject matter aside, it's hard to make good art.
yeah,
Sometimes people will say, "What kind of art do you make?" And if I'm feeling silly, I'll say, "Hopefully good, a good art." But I find that the collage, the mixed media work, it's, I don't know if I want to say it's easier to tell a story, but it's
mm.
all these little elements, all these little pieces of, in that case, Lloyd's life that kind of get woven together to help make that story.
Well, in a way, you tell your own story probably in your paintings because they are influenced by what you have seen.
Mm.
Like, I mean, I guess that's for every artist in a way, but I'm like, it's like you would paint a lot of I saw a lot of your paintings that were like your brother,
Yeah.
or it's a lot of people, like your
Yeah.
wife too, right? So it
Sure.
tells a story of a certain moment in your life or in the life of you and your loved ones, but also things that you have seen around you or like traveled around. So
Sure. Well, I think title has for a viewer anyway, title can play a bit of a role too, because certainly if I have a landscape that, says tree in the field, okay, tree in the field. But when it's Lloyd lives on, automatically, well, who's Lloyd? Was this somebody close to you? How did you know him? What does this mean? There's, that title kind of can lead you down a path a little
mhm.
more and guide you. And often,
That's why I hate when it's untitled.
oh, I do too. I hate that. I'll tell you just a little quick side note. I had a situation once because I hate it too. I don't, right? But I've had a few in the past, and I had a situation where I had a show once, and the gallery owner called me and said, "Oh, yeah, your work Untitled sold," and I was like, "Oh crap! I had two of them in there that were untitled." I was like, "What does it look like? Which one did I sell? And was it the more expensive one?" I hope so.
Yeah, it drives me nuts sometimes because I feel it depends on the museum too, but I feel like oftentimes, I don't know, I feel like when you go to MoMA, sometimes they're very sparse with their,
Yeah,
what they tell about the pieces.
yeah.
And then it's like, it's hard because you're like, okay, if I don't even have that and I don't have the title and, I'm not that, um, I don't know, not like I think sometimes you don't have to make art harder for people to understand.
Yeah, it can be sometimes. Having taught a bit of art history and also art appreciation, which was for non-art majors.
Hmm.
A lot of times we would obviously discuss the works in class and try to get in depth to a certain extent, but I would have them, regardless of what a museum would tell you about a piece of work, I would always encourage them though to just look at the work first without
Right.
reading. What does it say to you? What is it? Because a lot of times, especially with people who are maybe new to art, and they're viewing other work, they
Mm.
might say, I don't get that. I don't get this abstract art. I don't get this modern art. Art's not for me. Well, and I would always tell my students, but you never say that about music. You
Mm.
never listen to a song and because you don't like it, say, "Oh, I don't get it." You were mentioning jazz before, maybe very experimental jazz. Maybe that's not your thing, but I know you certainly don't say, "Well, I'm not listening to music anymore. Music's
Right. Right.
silly," or you read a book and you don't like it and say, "Well, I'm not reading anymore. Reading's dumb." And I think that's the thing about art, is
Mm.
like you go around and if you're in a museum, you may pass 10 things that you don't like, but something's going to speak to you, to everyone in there.
Right.
And it might be that it reminds you of something that I don't even see it, in the piece, but you look at it and say, oh, that reminds me of growing up and my childhood. I might go, what? What are you talking crazy? What are you talking about? But maybe it was a color or a shape or who knows,
Yeah, I mean, I
Plus,
think there's also a lot of like cultural differences, which I experience more now that I'm living in a different country. I remember I go with my friend Julie Pfeiffer-Balzer a lot to museums, and she went to Germany a couple times, and we had the reverse thing, happen. One was an exhibition by Sigmar Polke, who's a German
uh-huh.
artist
Yep.
in MoMA. And of course, he writes a lot. So a lot of his art has actually German writing, but there's also a lot of things that I grew up with,
Mm,
like certain advertisement figures that there was like the cigarette man, the HB uh, man, it was called, like, of course in German, HB-Männchen. And so, I would recognize that thing over and over. Or there was like an emblem for a folder that would like come over and over, and you only know that if you have ever
sure.
worked with files in in Germany, like in a law office, that's the file folder, and that's
You
the
have a point of
company that
reference.
makes the file folders, right? So you get like little pieces, and you understand, oh, this is about like East and West, and like whatever. There's all kinds of like very political stuff in there, and it was interesting because there was no explanation. MoMA had it very sparse. And so for her, it was really interesting because I was telling about what it would spark to me, which was totally
Okay.
different. She was just like looking more at the material, and like, it wasn't a story that was told really, because she couldn't grasp the story. So she was more interested in like, okay, how's the color, the material, the composition. And I was talking more about like the story it would convey to me, right? And then we also had this thing where I think it was Lawrence who did the big migration
Yeah,
paintings.
yeah, Jacob Lawrence, yeah.
Right. I had no idea who that was, to be honest, when I saw the first time like some of his paintings. And my friend Julie asked me how I feel when I look at some of those pictures, and or paintings, and I was like, well, it's nice colors, interesting,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she's like, you have no clue what this is about. And I
Yeah.
was like, no. And so, so that, long story short, but it's also interesting because sometimes then you, it means something totally different to you just because of your different cultural upbringing, right?
Yeah,
Because,
you have a frame of reference that's different than mine.
right.
Yeah, which makes me think that, see, no, we haven't done that. So that I think that has to be something. I think you and I need to
Yes.
make a museum visit.
Yes, we
Yeah.
should do that,
Yeah, we
definitely.
need to do that. We need to do
Yes.
that. And yeah, because it's interesting. Even if I have a frame of reference and let's say I know the story, I consider myself an artist who really likes process. I
Mm-hmm.
love. I've always said in some of my artist statements and things like that I just consider myself a mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Except instead of working on a car and using a wrench, I'm using a paintbrush, and it's very blue collar. It's very just it's dirty work.
Yeah.
It's yeah, you roll up your sleeves and you get to work. It's not delicate often, and so I like to see how somebody has manipulated the materials
Mm-hmm.
and how they've altered them maybe as well. That becomes very interesting to me, regardless of the
Right.
message that might be there.
I like that too. Okay, I could talk to you forever because it's so interesting, but unfortunately, I think we have to wrap it up. But I
Yeah,
wanted to ask: is there anything that's coming up? Do you have any shows or?
yeah. Yeah, so well, actually, I'm meeting somebody tomorrow. I think I may have a show in October. I'll keep you posted. I don't have news on that right now, so I'm meeting somebody tomorrow. Also things just sort of within the art world as well. I'm heading in March to Minneapolis. There's a thing called the FATE conference. So it means Foundations. It's an acronym: Foundations of Art Theory and Education.
Ah,
So it'll be a lot of professors, and I'm going to get to meet with them and hold a little focus group to really talk about materials
hmm.
and how they can best educate some of your first year, second year college art students. And going back to my analogy there of a mechanic, how do you get the most out of your tools?
Mm,
So yeah, I'm going to be doing that and meeting with professors, which will be really exciting. I think I mentioned before, a former student of mine, Chris Ramo, just is self-publishing a book. So I just finished the foreword for that book.
cool.
So that'll be coming out I'm not sure when that's coming out either. So yeah, there's stuff in the works. Yeah, and then I'm just having at it and looking forward to summer trips and getting more inspiration.
Are you doing a road trip this year?
I am doing a road trip. Yeah, well, I'll be doing two things. I'm going to be, my family and I have rented an old boathouse that sits on a lake in the Adirondacks in New York.
Nice.
So yeah, there'll be a lot of landscape painting there and picture taking. And then, yeah, my brother and I will be doing our annual road trip where northwest-ish, and
Okay.
that's all we really know. We pick a direction and who knows? We'll meet somebody and they'll tell us, you know what, you need to go here, and that's where we'll go. And they'll take photos and I'll draw, and yeah, we'll make some
You
art.
should make this should be a TV show. You
Oh,
two,
fine.
you two on the motorbike, and then like making art on the go, like photographing and painting and
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought for a while. It would be interesting to have a book. I think that would yeah, would show how we have both seen the same things
yes,
over a 17-year period. Yeah. So yeah,
yes,
we'll see.
you should do that. We
Yeah.
hold you accountable for that.
Oh
You
boy.
put it out in the universe. Now it's here.
No. Oh no.
Done.
You're the author.
Okay, thank you so much, Jimmy. That was awesome for your
Absolutely.
time and for your work. And I'm going to put Jimmy's website, Instagram, all his information in the video and also on the blog when I write it up. And check him out. He's awesome. His work is awesome. And thank you so much for being with us.
Not a
Bye.
problem. It's the feeling is mutual. You got a great thing going. Keep it up.
Bye.